The fire was a dying heart of orange embers in the vast, velvet blackness of the woods. Its light licked the faces of the 5 figures huddled around it, their shadows stretching long and distorted against the ancient pines. The air was cool, smelling of damp earth and pine resin, and the only sounds were the crackle of the fire and the distant, questioning call of an owl. A girl named Clara leaned forward, her dark eyes reflecting the dwindling flames. She pulled her worn leather jacket tighter around her. "It's time," she said, her voice a low murmur that seemed to be swallowed by the surrounding silence. The others, Maya, Ben, Leo, and Sam, drew their camping chairs closer. This was their ritual, their secret society under the stars. They called themselves the Shadowed Glen Club, and every full moon, they met in this hidden clearing to share a story. Not just any story. A true story. One that had to be told in the dark. Clara reached into her backpack and pulled out a small, tarnished silver locket. It was old, intricately carved with swirling, almost Celtic patterns that seemed to move in the flickering light. She didn't open it. Instead, she held it tightly in her palm. "This story," she began, her gaze fixed on the locket, "is called The Tale of the Echoing Locket. It didn't happen 100 years ago. It happened last summer. To a girl, not much older than us, named Clara." She paused, letting the silence settle back in, thicker this time, heavier. Clara's family had just moved to the sleepy town of Raven's Hollow. You know the type of place. One main street, everyone knows everyone else's business, and a history they'd rather forget. Their new house was on the very edge of town, right where the pavement turned to gravel and the gravel gave way to the deep, dark woods. And it wasn't just any house. It was the old Blackwood place. A collective, soft intake of breath came from the group. Everyone in the county knew the name. Nobody went there. The house had been empty for decades, Clara continued, her voice dropping to a near whisper. Since the Blackwood family vanished. Just, gone one night, leaving everything behind. Dinner on the table, toys on the floor. The story went that the parents had been obsessed with the occult, that they tried to pry open a door that was meant to stay shut. The town left the house to rot, a monument to their mistake. But Clara's family, they were from the city. They saw a fixer-upper with character. They saw a bargain. Clara's fingers traced the patterns on the locket. Clara hated it from the moment she saw it. It wasn't just the peeling paint or the sagging porch. It was the silence. A deep, watchful silence that felt hungry. Her first night there, lying in her new room, she heard the first of the whispers. Not words, not really. Just a soft, sighing sound, like a voice recorded on a cracked tape, played back from the bottom of a well. It seemed to come from the walls themselves. She tried to ignore it, blaming it on the wind in the old pipes or the settling of the house. But a few days later, while exploring the overgrown garden, she found something. Buried under a gnarled rose bush, its thorns as long as fingers, was a small metal box, rusted shut. It took her most of the afternoon to pry it open with a rock. Inside, wrapped in crumbling velvet, was this. Clara held up the locket, and it gleamed dully in the firelight. Clara was thrilled. It was beautiful, mysterious. A secret from the past. She cleaned it, polished it, and despite a faint, strange chill it seemed to radiate, she put it on. That's when the whispers became clearer. At first, it was almost pleasant. She'd be reading, and she'd hear a faint, melodic hum, like a half-remembered lullaby. She'd be walking through the empty halls, and she'd hear the soft patter of what sounded like a child's footsteps running just ahead of her, around the next corner. When she'd look, there was never anyone there. Just the dust motes dancing in the slivers of light. She started calling the presence Echo. It felt friendly. A lonely ghost from the past, happy for the company. She'd even talk to it. "Good morning, Echo," she'd say when she put the locket on. Sometimes, the whisper would sigh back, a little clearer each time. But then, Echo started wanting things. It began subtly. Clara would be drawing, and her pencil would roll off the desk. As she bent to pick it up, she'd hear a whisper, so close it was like someone was standing right behind her. "Look." And she'd look, and she'd see a loose floorboard under her desk she'd never noticed. Inside, she found a beautiful, old glass hair comb. She felt like she'd won a prize. Echo was helping her. Echo was her friend. The next time, her cat batted a ball of yarn under the heavy old wardrobe in her parents' room. As she strained to reach for it, the whisper came again, cold against her ear. "Look up." She did. Taped to the underside of the wardrobe was a small, yellowed envelope containing a stack of old, valuable stamps. Her father, a collector, was overjoyed. Clara was delighted. The locket, Echo, was a treasure map. But the gift started to change. A few days later, the whisper guided her to a space behind the kitchen stove. Not a gift this time, but a long, sharp kitchen knife, covered in old, brown stains. The whisper that time was different. It wasn't melodic. It was eager. "Remember." The atmosphere in the house shifted. The silence was no longer just watchful, it was anticipatory. The whispers were no longer just in the walls, they were in her head, a constant, murmuring stream. The playful footsteps became heavier, slower, always just out of sight. She started seeing things in the periphery of her vision, a flicker of an old-fashioned white dress, a pale hand withdrawing around a doorframe. The climax came on the night of the summer storm. The power went out, plunging Blackwood House into a blackness so complete it felt solid. The wind howled like a chorus of the lost, and rain lashed against the windows. Clara, terrified, huddled under her blankets, clutching the locket. It was ice-cold against her skin. And then the whispering began. Not a sigh. Not a single voice. A multitude. Harsh, overlapping, demanding. "The door. It's time. Open the door." "What door?" Clara cried into the darkness, her voice trembling. "The door in the basement. The one they sealed. The one we need. You have the key. You found it. You wear it. The locket." It wasn't just a locket. It was a key. The voices became a command, a psychic pressure that made her head throb. She felt her own body moving, getting out of bed, as if pulled by strings. She descended the creaking stairs into the belly of the house, the voices a roaring flood in her mind. The basement door was a dark mouth open in the hallway. She'd never gone down there. The smell of damp earth and something else, something metallic and old, wafted up. She walked down the rough concrete steps into the oppressive dark. The beam of her flashlight shook in her hand. And there it was. On the far wall, where the old foundation wasn't concrete. It was a door made of dark, heavy wood, banded with iron. It looked ancient. And across it, nailed in a crisscross pattern, were newer planks of wood, like a barricade. On each plank, strange symbols were painted in a flaking, rust-colored substance. The voices in her head screamed in unison, a sound of pure, ecstatic hunger. "Open it." Trembling, compelled, she reached up. The locket felt like a shard of ice in her hand. She saw a keyhole, oddly shaped, right in the center of the iron bands. It was the exact size and shape of the locket. As she brought it closer, the symbols on the door began to glow with a faint, malevolent red light. This was it. This was what the Blackwoods had tried to do. This was why they vanished. They hadn't opened the door. They had only gotten as far as making the key. And she had found it. She was about to finish their work. With a final, desperate effort of will, Clara tried to pull her hand back. But the whispers became a physical force, holding her arm rigid. The locket was inches from the lock. And then, a new sound cut through the psychic storm. A real sound. A frail, desperate scratching from the other side of the door. And a voice, a real, human voice, choked with tears and decades of dust, whispered through the keyhole. "Please, don't, we're trapped in here, it wants out, it will wear our faces." It was the voice of a child. A Blackwood child. In that moment of shocking clarity, Clara understood. The whispers in her head weren't echo. They were the thing on the other side of the door. It had been calling to her, tempting her, guiding her to it all along. The gifts, the whispers, the footsteps, all a lure. The thing behind the door had used the memory of its victims, the echoes of the lost family, as bait. It had been mimicking them, perfecting its imitation over long, lonely years, waiting for a new hand to hold the key. With a scream that tore from the very depths of her soul, Clara wrenched her arm back. The connection broke. The locket chain snapped, and the silver disc clattered to the concrete floor. The red glow on the door vanished. The voices in her head cut off into a silence that was somehow more terrifying than the noise had been. She scrambled back up the stairs, out of the house, and into the storm, not stopping until she collapsed on the rain-soaked gravel of the road. Clara fell silent. The fire had burned down to a bed of glowing coals. The woods around them were utterly still, as if holding their breath. Nobody around the circle moved. What happened to her? Sam finally asked, his voice hushed. She told her parents everything, Clara said softly. They didn't believe the supernatural parts, of course. They thought it was a breakdown, brought on by the stress of the move and the isolation of the old house. They moved away a week later, back to the city. They left everything behind. Again. She looked down at the locket still in her hand. Clara tried to forget. She threw herself into her new old life. But some things stick. She'd be in a crowded mall, and she'd hear a faint, familiar whisper from a passing stranger. "Hello." She'd be looking in her bathroom mirror, and for a split second, she'd see a pale, smiling face looking back over her shoulder, a face that wasn't hers. The locket was gone, left behind in that dark basement. But she could still feel it, sometimes. A cold spot against her chest, right where it used to lie. Clara slowly fastened the chain of the locket around her own neck. It settled against her skin, cool and heavy. She thought she'd won. She thought by dropping the key, she'd stopped it. But she was wrong. The thing behind the door, it didn't need the key to be in the lock. It just needed the key to be found. To be awakened. It needed a connection. And now that connection was made. The door is still sealed, but the thing inside, it's learned how to send out little pieces of itself. Echoes. It's learned how to mimic perfectly. It's patient. It's hungry. And it's always listening for the right person to pick up its call again. She looked up at her friends, her face pale and serious in the dim light. The locket felt like a weight of ice over her heart. The worst part, Clara whispered, and her voice was now different, carrying a faint, melodic, and utterly chilling harmonic beneath it, a sound that was not quite her own, is that you never really know if the person you're talking to is who they say they are. Or if they're just an echo, waiting for you to lead them home. She smiled then, a slow, unfamiliar smile that didn't touch her eyes. The locket, against her skin, was no longer cold. It was warm.